Welcome to Close Mode. I'm Brian Dietmeyer, and today I'm fortunate to have with me Fiona Simpson. And Fiona is the Sales Enablement Lead at D2L. Welcome, Fiona.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
It's lovely to see your festive background. You're getting me in the
Yes,
spirit. I've been lazy so
I
far.
I'm a big fan of the holidays, and so I had to put a little Christmas cheer in my office.
Nice, nice. Hopefully, you'll motivate me maybe to do the same. So let's dive into this. So Um, obviously, our subject is enterprise selling, sales enablement. So, what's a resource, tool, channel, something that you think people aren't using correctly or using to its fullest?
That's a great question, and definitely spending a lot of time watching what sellers do, interacting with frontline managers. There's probably a couple that I could think of, but I think one that is very top of mind for a lot of people today, and it may be a little buzzwordy, but I think it's true, is that we're really a little bit behind the eight ball with utilizing AI in the
Mhm.
sales process.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right. It is buzzwordy, and it is sort of what is AI? How do you define it? But so what? And so you're saying that sales, the use of AI in sales, is kind of behind the curve a little bit. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think one, a lot of people just have had a hard time kind of identifying, like you said, what is AI? How can we leverage it? What tools are out there? Is it, Terminator movies and all of the
Yeah.
things that we grew up with as kids thinking about artificial intelligence? So I think it's been really hard to kind of put your finger on the pulse of what AI tools are out there, what it means. Is there some security and ethical type of questions to be asked, right? There's just so many questions to be asked that I
Yeah.
think folks haven't really sat down at square one to figure it out in
Yeah,
a lot
what
of cases.
it's interesting. What comes to mind when you say that is like there's so much coming at us so fast, and it's changing so quickly that even that down to sort of like what is it? You know,
Right.
AI is a really broad, really broad and brand new thing. What do you think the impact is for sales teams of kind of being behind the curve?
Yeah, well, I heard a really interesting stat earlier this year. I believe it was from Forrester that said sellers are spending as little as 22% of their time actually selling, which means they're spending, what is that, 78% of their time not doing sales
Right.
things.
Yes.
And I think the impact is that if our sellers are doing all of these other things, whether it's updating CRM tools or putting together account plans or all of this, what a colleague of mine used to call administrivia, right? These things that take time and they need to be done to help prepare us for calls with customers, to help forecast for the organization, right? All these things are important, but they're so manual and they're so slow and they take so much time that we're eating up, let's go, if you do the math, we're eating up, let's say 6 or 7 hours of the day, giving our sellers 1 hour a day to sell. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
No, it's it's frightening actually. So I was listening to a podcast with Jim Dickey of Sales Mastery the other day, and he was saying that there's kind of two big pieces of AI. There's an effectiveness use and an efficiency use,
Mhm.
and I think you were just kind of leaning on the efficiency side, right? Can
Sure.
what can AI do to give reps more time to do the things that they're supposed to be doing? What
Right.
yeah, what do you see as areas where AI might be leveraged for we can get to effectiveness later, but for efficiency up front?
Yeah, so I think on the efficiency side of the coin, and by the way, thank you for calling that out because I think there are two sides to the coin, right? If we think about the efficiency side, if we give those reps, let's say 25% more time to sell, that's going to double their everything, hopefully, right? If you just keep
Yes.
keep some linear math in there. I won't get into any nonlinear equations today. But on the efficiency side, if we do things like leverage tools that do conversation intelligence and take all of our notes for us so that I don't have to spend 25 minutes in the CRM after a phone call, getting all my notes in place. Right. Conversation intelligence tool could be listening for, who are the competitors in the space? What are the pain points? Right. And it can identify a lot of those details for me. So things like that are established, right? We've got those choruses, gongs, all those guys out there in the marketplace today. I also think there's more creative ways that AI could be used, right? Whether that's coming up with um, uh, a sequence of events or mutually agreed action plan, right? Drop the details into a chat GPT and have it spit back out for you that nice formatted mutual action plan, whatever you want to call it. So lots of small administrative things that I think can be sort of corralled into either tools that already exist or
Yeah.
just using the tools that are broad in more creative ways.
Yeah, it's interesting too because right at the outset we were like, well, what is it even? What are the categories? We've talked a little bit about efficiency and effectiveness, but so you sort of making a distinction between just Chat GPT, how you can use that, and then AI that's being offered by firms who have an AI solution.
Right. Right.
And
And I
how?
think,
Go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Please
I
keep
was
going.
going to say on the effectiveness side of the house, I think there's a lot of progress being made by SaaS companies in that arena today. If you look at things like um, the evolution of a tool like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and then all of the other companies that have grown from that to say, okay, how do I find my customers where they are? How do I basically scrape the internet, for lack of a better way of
Yeah,
explaining it,
yeah.
to get data about my prospects, my industry, all of those. So there's a broad swath of organizations and companies that are out there doing things like that. Um, and on the effectiveness side, I think that's where those tools can be really leveraged.
Hmm. So yeah, and I've seen a lot lately about the email tools that are out there as
Yeah.
well. So it seems to me, and in hearing you talk about this, that if we need this sort of menu of options, right? Here's ways you can use Chat GPT. Here are tools that the company has subscribed to that you can leverage as well. But who do you think owns the AI strategy in a sales organization?
Well, all of my enablement friends out there are going to love my response to that because I absolutely think that it's sales enablement, right?
Yeah,
Because from a strategic perspective, enablement has always been a part of the tech stack ownership, management, rollout, etc. And I think this is no different. I think that while they of course enablement needs to work with stakeholders across the board, um ultimately, in my personal opinion, and maybe shared by a
yeah.
lot of my fellow enablers, anything that relates to improving the way our sellers sell falls under the umbrella of enablement.
So, and how would you? So, if I'm a revenue sales enablement person, and I'm trying to figure out what my strategy is, what are your thoughts on? I mean, again, it's so broad. There's like, how do you use ChatGPT, which is free? What should we be
Yeah.
paying for and subscribing for? Do you have any idea of sort of a needs analysis, and then maybe even potential business case to be made?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say, for me personally in my work, it's not a bridge that I've crossed yet.
Yeah,
I probably should have crossed it like a year ago, but hey, here we are. Somebody I know who's sort of an expert in this, I would say, maybe he would say expert's a strong word. I would label him an expert, is Jonathan Carfert, or also known as Coach K out there
yeah,
on LinkedIn. He's really dove in on how AI gets utilized in the go to market function across the board. So he's a great thought leader on that. He does have things like some evaluations and sort of strategy tools. So I would definitely lean on him if I were
yeah,
going about that process for
yeah.
my own organization. But I think what it comes down to is any kind of investment needs to be something that's not just a flash in the pan. So I saw a stat recently that in 2020, there were 25,000 SaaS companies operating, I believe, in North America. In 2024, that number is going to be as high as 75,000, triple the number of companies out there. And we all know I lived through the dot-com era in the 90s. Not all of those companies are going to succeed. So I say all of that to say making any sort of investment in technology needs to be proven. It needs to be something that's going to be sustainable. It needs to be something that, whether it's something that it turns out can be leveraged by the whole organization, not just sales, or if it's something that has been a front runner or sort of early to the game in terms of leveraging AI. I think that is a critical piece. You can't just buy the shiniest new thing that's out there. And then I think on the other side of that, really understanding what the pieces are that are slowing down our sales teams. So if people are really struggling with putting together outbound emails, if people are really struggling with keeping track of information about their prospects and their opportunities, whatever those struggles are, I think those are the pain points that you address first, right? We
Yeah.
we like to think of enablement, we like to think of the sales team as our customer. And in the same way that we train our sellers, this is about the customer, this is about their needs, this is about their pain points. We look at it from the perspective of what are our sellers' pain points? That's what we need to solve for.
Yeah, and I believe you said something on our pre-interview about leading versus lagging indicators, and that there's a lot of emphasis on win rates and that sort of thing. But your point, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was, and I think you just spoke about those, some of those leading indicators, which are what are the pain points of the reps, what are these, what's sucking up their time, or what are they not good at?
Yep, exactly. I think it is very easy to point to those lagging indicators, AAR, win rates, and so on and so forth. But that's all information that we don't get until the quarter or the year has closed,
Yeah,
right? And we really need to get in front of the issues because if we make, like I was saying earlier, right? If we make our sellers have 10 or 15 or 20% more selling time on the front end, if we make them 5 or 10 or 8% more efficient at X on the front end as they're executing the sales process, then we make an impact on the front end. And the results should be, again, linear math here,
yeah.
but the result should be increased performance across the board if we're doing things on the front end that enable them to sell better.
Yeah, that makes more sense. It occurs to me too. There's kind of a refocus. So if we come up with 20% more time, we don't want to be doing 20% maybe of activities that aren't working. It's like, how can we then move into that effectiveness to say, okay, we have 20.
Exactly.
And to me, that feels like the the double barrel right there is to go, here's more time, and then what are the effectiveness tools that make your selling better? So we are getting to those lagging indicators. It also occurs to me, back to my question to you about like who should be in the lead. What came to mind, and I do agree with you that sales enablement should be in the lead. Then there is an upward internal sales motion of trying to get staff and executives like on board with the AI
Hmm.
strategy in your company. And I imagine that's easier to harder based on sort of how forward thinking are those folks, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this ties back to something that I'm very passionate about personally, which is that for a long time, enablement and tech stack and sales training and things like that have kind of been hovering in this sort of mid-level management arena of the organization for a lot of cases. And I think situations exactly like you described are the reason why ultimately enablement needs to be in the C suite at the executive level because that gives enablement the authority to pursue the strategy and work with the other strategic leaders across the organization. When you're sort of barking up the ladder, you only have so much authority, you only have so much power over making change in the organization. And so I think it goes hand in hand with the elevation of sales enablement, revenue enablement as a profession. This is why we need to do that, is because we need to be planning out our 2025, 2026 enablement strategies and investments and everything else. And if we're not sitting at the table, we can't help.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
And
can't be part of the conversation if we don't have literally a seat at the table that says Chief Enablement Officer.
yeah. And my understanding is you're fairly involved with the Revenue Enablement Society in the Atlanta chapter. Is that fair?
That is, I would say that that is extremely fair.
Yeah. So, given your role as a VP in the Atlanta chapter, um, talk to me about that shift from Sales Enablement Society to Revenue Enablement Society. Where did that come from? What is the group hoping to achieve with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's exactly some of the things that I just hit on.
Yes.
In the same way that AI is still kind of nebulous, there was a long time where enablement was very nebulous and people had a really hard time putting their finger on it, the same way we think about AI and how nebulous it is now. And so I think really ultimately the goal of the Revenue Enablement Society is to not only help define the profession, but also elevate it. And the big shift that took place, I would say, over the last 12 to 18 months is sales is one component, right? Sales in any organization is a very big piece of how the company achieves revenue. But there are other people involved in that process, and everybody needs to be singing from the same sheet of music, if you will. And as organizations as a whole start to look at the revenue organization rather than just a sales organization, a marketing organization, a customer success organization as separate silos, I think it was really important for the society to follow that trend of approaching enablement from a revenue centric or a go to market centric standpoint rather than strictly just living under the umbrella of sales.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I watched that name change and that strategy change, it takes me back to many years ago. I built the first national account organization in the company that I worked for, and I reached out to Strategic Account Management Association. Right, I'm like, okay, I don't know a lot about this. I've got to find out about the whole profession of account management, and it's interesting because I feel like sales enablement is now where strategic account management was maybe 10 years ago or more, when the management team was having the discussion about, so what is account manager, what do these global and these national account managers do, how do we define it, what's the ROI? And I feel like they did a really good job of kind of defining that and talking about the ROI and putting some standards against it. Where do you think revenue enablement is in that life cycle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you had to take the average across the industry, I'd say we're about halfway there.
Okay.
I think, in the sense of really identifying what it is that we do, what we don't do, check that box. I think at this stage in time, pretty much everybody understands the definitions around enablement. I think where it gets more tricky and where we're still getting our feet under us is sort of the how do we do it, right?
Right.
What kind of teams do we need? Where should they sit in the organization? Who should they report to? That's been a really big question lately. Where should enablement fall in the spectrum of, does it fall under marketing, rev ops, sales leadership? That's one that I think a lot of people, the dust is settling, but it's not quite settled yet. I'll put it that way. Just in terms of overall kind of progress towards that, sort of enshrined, understood, encapsulated, elevated strategic level, I'd say we're like halfway there.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I'm curious. About a year or so ago, as part of another project, we're trying to define sales enablement, and I looked at 10 different. It was at the time the Sales Enablement Society, some industry analysts, and the 10 different definitions. There was three things that were common across all three. That it was training, of course, it was content, and it was technology. And those are the three commonalities I found across 10 different definitions of it. How do you think that's off? Is it directionally accurate?
I think it's directionally accurate. I think there's a little bit of room to kind of nail down what I kind of think of as the ethos of enablement, in the sense that what is our ultimate goal, right? Why are we doing this? And me, and I think a handful, maybe more than a handful of folks out there, really are of the mindset that ultimately we're in the business of helping sellers, who are people, sell better, right?
Yeah.
And what that comes down
Yeah.
to is, how do we make these individuals better at their job? What does that look like? What does that need. And there are lots of components that funnel into that. It's content, it's training, it's coaching, it's a whole gamut of things. But ultimately, it all needs to roll up into how does this individual go from point A to point B? And I think that's what also
Yeah.
translates when you start to work with other parts of the organization outside of just your AEs. So when you're looking at your BDRs, when you're looking at customer success, when you're looking at anything else within the revenue organization, if that's the purview of the enablement role, concept still applies, right? How do I make my customer success reps better at customer success? How do I make our BDRs better at what they do? So I think that piece of it, really putting our hands around sort of our remit globally and having a little less back and forth about, well, it's only training or it's only
Right.
for sales or it's only this. I think we really need to put our arms all the way around. We're making people in this organization better at doing their jobs. Then everything can kind of fall under that umbrella.
Yeah, I'm curious how you feel about this. A couple of years ago, I read a book. I think it was put out by Harvard Business Press, and it was about sales being the execution arm of corporate strategy. Not of all corporate strategy, but there's a lot of corporate strategy that is
Sure.
executed sort of one deal at a time by sales, and it's just kind of a personal interest of mine. How well do you think that corporate strategy, and especially now corporate strategy is changing so quickly, how well is that being, those things that sales can impact, how well is that being connected? How can it be improved? Are there tools that are being used to do that? How does that happen today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've witnessed this in a couple of organizations over the past few years, and I think it's an interesting challenge because, from a corporate strategy perspective, companies need to sell more, they need to sell it faster at a higher price, they need to cut costs, right? They're in this really compressing situation,
Yes.
right? Where everything is just getting compacted. It's almost like making a diamond, right? Like all of these pressures are pushing
Yeah.
on the corporate strategy. And I think one of the challenges, especially in the SaaS world, is what that often looks like is launching new products, making dramatic upgrades, acquiring other businesses and
Yes.
folding them into your existing business, whatever those things are that are being done at a lightning pace. What then falls behind is all of the details.
Yes.
I have seen it in a couple of different organizations. We're going to acquire this other product. We're going to fold it into our product. You guys go sell it. Get going. Bye.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? That's the corporate strategy. And there are so many pieces of the puzzle that are just sort of, okay, we'll figure it out as we go along.
Right.
And sellers are just wondering, what the heck am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to sell this? What does this even do? Does it actually even integrate into our product, right? All of these pieces. And what happens is sellers stay where they're comfortable, right? I don't know how to sell that new thing. I'm not even going to try. I'm not even going to bother because I know I can be marginally successful selling the way that I've already sold, selling the same product I've already been selling. I'm not even going to try to figure out this new thing because no one's trying to help me figure it out and no one has the answers that I need to
Yeah.
actually sell it.
Yeah, what comes to mind is, okay, well, we announced it at SKO. Why is nobody selling it, right? So, but it's interesting because a while back I was speaking with an SVP at probably a Fortune 25 company who just bought one of their biggest competitors in Europe, and now
Mm,
they could compete with their domestic competitor better as they were doing global deals. And I asked him, how long before words are coming out of your salespeople's mouths that reflect the value of this acquisition and speed up your time to revenue for this? And he told me 6 months, best case, probably more 9 to 12. Right. And
yeah.
that's kind of, as you were going through your story, I was thinking about that discussion with him that, um, and you're right. The core problem is what I heard you say, that I completely agree with, is there's this sort of fear. So let's go back to words coming out of mouths. So we
Hmm.
just rolled out this
Hmm.
new thing and acquired this new company, and we're going to tell you about it, and you're going to have to kind of make up the words coming out of your mouths, right? How do you position it? How do you position it against customer needs? How do you position it against a competitor? I was reading again something recently that said we don't practice enough on those words, right? And I think that's some of the
Yeah.
missing pieces that you're talking about. Is let's conversationally, how are we finding the need for
Yeah.
this new thing? How are we plugging it in?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the strategy of enablement, right? Because if you're doing an acquisition, think about all the players that are part of that process. You've got public relations, you've got finance, you've got product and development, figuring out how to plug the square pegs into the round holes.
Yeah.
You've got customer success trying to understand how to onboard the former customers into the new company. And then you just sort of make this assumption that sales is just going to magically know how to go out and sell it.
Yes.
And that doesn't quite check out, right? You don't, I've seen so many companies where they don't put the same level of intent and preparation into something like an acquisition or a new product launch or whatever it may be. They don't put the same level of effort in for the sales team or preparation for those folks as you would any other component of that acquisition process or that product launch. And it's very surprising to me. It's sort of like first things last and last things first, guys.
Yeah, I think there's three. I'm so glad we're talking about this because this is a thing that I'm intrigued by. So I think there's three touch points. So if you have this new strategy or this new acquisition, what, one of the touch points with the customer is what new customer needs am I impacting in a better way now? What metrics can I move in the customer
Mhm.
organization? The second one is how am I now sort of in side by side analysis with competing alternatives now that we have this new thing.
Mhm.
And the third piece, which really gets down to the kind of brass tacks, is the commercial terms. How am I packaging
Yeah,
customer facing offers? And I,
totally.
yeah, good. Yeah, I'm glad. I feel like those, we can boil it down to kind of those three. And I do agree with you. We need practice, we need guidance on those. And we need to do that in a safe environment where we get at least as comfortable as selling the old thing.
Right. Well, and I think you brought up the word practice a couple of times. And I think what's really important about that is, you know, practice doesn't mean doing the same thing over and over and over again. A good friend of mine who works with sales training says if strict repetition was all that mattered about getting better at something, every 70-year-old person would be an expert driver.
Right.
Clearly, we know that's not true if you've ever been to South Florida in the
I live
wintertime.
there. Yes.
Right? So you know, right, that just because you've done the same thing repeatedly
Yep.
over and over and over again doesn't make you get better at it. It just means it affirms you can do it the same way you've always done it.
Yeah.
And to what I was saying earlier, what you have to introduce is the variables and the changes and what's new and different and how do you react to something new and different and how do you pick the right tool out of your toolbox to respond to that new and different scenario. Back to the driving analogy, I grew up in California. I had never driven in icy roads ever in my entire
Right.
life. People will be surprised to hear that in Atlanta, roads get icy once or twice a year. And my dad, brilliant guy, when I was learning how to drive, explained to me over and over again, here's what you should do if you come across ice, blah, 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 right? Steer into it, all that good stuff. Cognitively, I had a pretty strong education about how to drive in ice. Now, the very first time I ever hit a patch of black ice on the road, what did I do? I did not say aloud to myself the spiel of all the things my dad
Right.
had taught me, right? I reacted. And I learned very quickly in that moment, in a physical sense, I learned what to do because I just had to kind of figure it out. And I think that's what practice is, right? Practice is being in the actual environment or the scenario and having those unpredictable elements show up and learning how to respond.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I'm going to go back. We started talking about like elevating revenue enablement to the C-suite and have this maybe this supposition that if we're more the execution arm of company strategy, right, that's going to help elevate us, I believe. And then
Mhm.
we went down to this next level about um, like in context. I interviewed a sales enablement lead a couple of weeks ago, and she talked a lot about training and skill practice is oftentimes very generic, and she really pounded on this thing of in context. It's saying, okay, we just acquired this new business in Europe. Let's put it in context when you're doing competitive analysis or you're doing pricing. And I feel like that is what's missing after it's announced at SKO. And you said they just, all right, these are
Right.
salespeople. They're going to sell it. They're not going to unless they have that in context practice.
Exactly. And I think it all folds back into who was preparing that practice. Who was thinking ahead to, okay, we're going to announce this. Here's the next step and the next step and the next step. Here are
Yeah.
the competencies we need to achieve from our sellers with this new value proposition or this new package or whatever it is. There, the challenge and where the gap is that no one has been identified to do that work ahead of time.
Yes.
They go, oh, enablement will figure it out later. But it's like, no, no, no. Enablement needed to be at the table 6 months ago when we decided to do this acquisition so they could start planning.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where we run into a lot of trouble.
Yep. I agree. It's really helpful, and this is like exciting and interesting for me to think about this connection. Like how do we get that relevance in the C-suite? It's a lot of what we're talking about, and it forces a little rethinking from everybody. I think from us at the enablement level as well as senior management about our role. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's cool. It's really helpful. So we talked about that. We also, the other thing I took away from our AI conversation is, so how do you begin to think through your AI strategy? Who owns it? You're saying revenue enablement owns it, sales enablement. And you start with those leading indicators. What are the pain points that the reps are having? In both in terms of efficiency, how do we get them more time, and effectiveness? What tools are out there to make them more effective? And I think it's a cool way to think through, okay, here's the things we're struggling with. What's inefficiency? What's effectiveness? And then kind of scan the market. Again, free chat
Right.
GPT can do some of these things. And then
Sure.
what SaaS companies are out there where I can buy a solution to help with either effectiveness or efficiency.
Yeah, well, let's take that into the scenario we've just been talking about, right? So our company's acquired a new product. We're going to fold it into our packaging. Where are we today, right? Where are our sellers now? And where do we need them to be with talk tracks, etc., value propositions, packaging, let's call those three things.
Sure.
Okay, we know they're here. We know we need to get them to here. What are the steps that it's going to take to get there? Is it practice? Is it retraining them on a new, well, let me take a step back there. Is it understanding a new market, a new industry, a new set of buyers, right? How do we use intelligence to help us really quickly look at this new segment of the market, identify the right prospects, all of that, right? So there are tools out there today that can really help with that process. If I
Yeah.
have my account list when I'm selling X and now I need a new account list because I'm going to be selling X and Y,
Yeah.
how do I really quickly adapt to the change in my total addressable market? And that's a really
Yeah.
important place where you could use a tool that does market intelligence and all those sorts of things to very quickly execute that process. And then you can go to your sellers and say, here's your new account list.
Yeah.
Here's your new buyer personas. Here's your new ICP, and so on and so forth. So I think when you
Yeah.
kind of pull the thread all the way through, you see how leveraging those AI tools and so forth really makes an impact on a very real scenario.
Yep. Yeah, it's what occurs to me when you're walking through that is, this idea that marketing, a lot of that content from the new software, the new acquisition will come from marketing, and it's probably fine, but marketing is one to many, right? And what I feel like you and I are talking about is we need to get it down to the granular one-to-one sales level conversations. And I was just reading a while back about the difference between sort of marketing content and very specific granular level sales content. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's what's missing at the highest end. It's integrating us all the way at the top with the acquisition, but at the bottom end, it's practice of those one-to-one dialogues. Cool. This is
Way to put a perfect little bow on it, Brian. I love that.
no, this is fun. I feel like this has been sort of a fireside chat that's like, even without the fireside, but maybe a Christmas tree side chat.
Maybe, yeah, I was gonna say maybe I should add that to my little setup
Yeah.
here.
No, it's helpful to think through it, and there's a clear blueprint in my mind, especially for kind of figuring out how do we go after AI, and then the other piece, which is how do we elevate the role of revenue enablement. So I really appreciate your time, and as well as your Christmas tree, and hope you have great holidays.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.